Star Wars Underworld was a planned live-action television series developed by George Lucas from about 2005 to 2010. Planned as a sort of ground-level look at the Star Wars universe, the show would have been an anthology, with a couple of important characters regularly showing up quite often. While it's hard to say for sure what the plans were since we don't have access to the scripts, it seemed like Boba Fett was going to be perhaps the most important recurring character, probably with Daniel Logan reprising his role since it was Lucas who requested that he return for the Clone Wars. Other important characters seem to include Palpatine, Lando, Breha and Leia Organa, Quinlan Vos, and a then-never-before-seen character named Saw Gerrera. Lucas's version of Saw Gerrera is shrouded in mystery, as, again, we know little about Underworld. However, at least parts of his character seem to be the one that we know. Militant, virtuous, anti-fascist leader, all qualities we know post-prequels Lucas liked in his stories. While the storylines of canon Saw Gerrera probably weren't planned, we know he was modeled after Che Guevara and Cuban revolutionaries in general. It's likely the overall character was still going to be what we know. This is part of why Underworld honestly seemed like it was going to be pretty unique. At least 5 lead characters of color, lack of focus on the upper echelons of society, removal from the Jedi and the Sith, and a real grounded perspective of the Star Wars universe. Now, obviously this is not me saying Underworld would have been perfect, though Red Tails was surprisingly good and the only movie about African-American soldiers directed by a white man I've ever seen that doesn't rely on a white savior. We can't pretend that Lucas didn't make the Nemoidians Japanese stereotypes, the Gungans African-American stereotypes, or Watto a Jewish stereotype. I just want to make it clear that, though Underworld seemed promising, I'm not excusing Lucas's history of racism. Still, despite that promise, Underworld was not to be. Scheduling, cost, conventions, Lucas wasn't able to actually begin filming Underworld outside of one test footage that only was released after I began writing this script. Yet, while the show wasn't released, elements were adapted. The dark theme was adapted into the movie Rogue One, the concept of a Mandalorian and a droid bounty hunter duo was adapted into, well, The Mandalorian, and as for Saw Gerrera, while unfortunately Underworld wasn't where he would premiere, there was another Star Wars television show that did premiere.
Season 5 has begun. Following an episode where a black woman dies to motivate a white man, The Clone Wars begins a new story arc written by John Wick 3 author Chris Collins. Reunited with the least interesting separatist Lux Bonteri, Ahsoka must join a group of rebels on the planet Onderon. Consulting with George Lucas, Pennsylvanian cowboy Dave Filoni is given 2 characters to include in this new arc.
After Underworld was pretty much out of the picture, Lucas decided to introduce Saw Gerrera to the Clone Wars. Established as being part of the first group of what would eventually become the Rebel Alliance, this was pretty big. Though story was out of Lucas's hands, he still got to influence how the Alliance began, and, at the center of it, was a black teenager. Furthermore, with regard to today's topic, Filoni wanted to have a brother-sister relationship this season, so Lucas created another character, Steela Gerrera, and both Steela and Saw were great. They both had great virtues and talents, but were also flawed in areas, being relatable without being incompetent. Saw was proud and impulsive, but he was also empathetic, kind, forgiving, and unwaveringly loyal. Steela was occasionally suspicious of people to a fault, but also compassionate, fearless, intelligent, and a fantastic leader. They represent the best kind of characters Lucas creates. Not paragons of virtue or miserable lost causes, but realistic, identifiable people, genuinely good souls forced to work in difficult situations, who sometimes make mistakes, but always put the needs of others first in the end. They're the kind of characters that we can see ourselves in, both the person that we are and the person that we want to be. And they were also the first black characters to get their own arcs in the Clone Wars. Though Mace and Adi had big episodes, they were never the main characters of a continuing story. Add to this that while cinematic Mace and Lando were big characters, there were no black women in the Star Wars movies that weren't cameos, aliens, or side characters. Though Star Wars droids did have Jessica Meade as a major character, and both of the Starfighter games had different black women as leads, this was the first time that George Lucas himself created a black woman intended to be an important part of the Star Wars universe, meaning Steela would reach a bigger audience and provide representation for more young black girls. In terms of both quality and representation, Saw and Steela represented a positive change for Star Wars. Unfortunately, Steela was disrespected by both the narrative and the fandom. I'll speak about what the narrative did to her, but as for the fandom, as I'm really not a part of the fandom and also not a black woman, I don't feel like I'm the most qualified person to talk about it. Which is why I'm very happy to announce that today we have a special guest. Everybody, please welcome a person who I've cited before on this channel, someone who is fantastically skilled in writing analysis, as well as publishing her own fantastic work that I will link below, Avery.
Hello everyone, and thank you Moth for inviting me to speak in your video. So yes, my name is Avery, and I'm a blogger and writer who typically speaks on issues of race, gender, and sexuality within the realms of fandom. Some of you may have known me when I was active on my diversity and Star Wars Tumblr. I'm now more active with my articles, which you can find on my Twitter, Space Lovelies, if you're interested. Today, I'm very happy to be joining in Moth's podcast, talking about one of my favorite characters from Star Wars, Steela. And before I get into it, I just want to put out a disclaimer. I have a cold, which is why I sound like this. I believe Steela also faced heavy mistreatment by the fandom. As mentioned before, she was either meant to be an extension of Ahsoka, or simply did not have her complex narrative respected by the fandom. This is seen with her very canon and healthy relationship with Lux. To start off with, the relationship between Lux and Steela was extremely important because it depicted an interracial relationship that had a black woman being cared for and loved. While Lux as a character was questionable, there was absolutely nothing wrong with their relationship. Lux did not overstep when it came to his treatment of Steela or her role as a leader. In fact, he encouraged and helped her any way he could and made sure that she knew she had his full support. The thing is, Steela existed as a character when it came to her relationship with Lux. Taking Lux away from Steela wouldn't have ruined her character in the slightest. Steela was still allowed to stand alone in this narrative while being with a person who loved her. The Lux-Steela relationship allows us to explore her character in multi-dimensions, while the story still painted her as a main character and Lux did not take her spotlight. He supported her. Steela was allowed to stand alone while being loved by Lux. This is why the Lux relationship was important to Steela, yet most of the fandom rejected it. Most of the fandom rejected it in place of Ahsoka and Steela. A huge note here. I understand the importance of sapphic relationships between women, especially black women, but if that relationship just involves a black woman being used as a plot tool/device to strengthen a non-black woman's narrative, then that is toxic and unfair to the black woman. Above, there are already flaws mentioned in the relationship of Steela and Ahsoka, but both in canon and fandom, Steela is not allowed to exist for herself. She only exists as an extension for Ahsoka. She exists to be Ahsoka's girlfriend and nothing more than that to fandom. Just like canon, many Steela-Ahsoka shippers tend to center Steela's importance, character, and goal around Ahsoka. With Ahsoka, Steela is not allowed to exist for herself. Many people care for Steela only because they can ship her with Ahsoka, and that's all. Her rich background as a refugee, a rebel leader, and a black woman is completely tarnished by canon and fandom, so she can be there for Ahsoka's development and nothing else. And then, the issue we have here is one of the few dark-skinned black women human we get in the Star Wars universe is no longer existing for herself. Both in fanon and canon, she exists only for Ahsoka. And the main focus of the Steela and Ahsoka ship is how Ahsoka can be pampered and coddled by Steela, and not much how Steela develops after this. And this is the ship the fandom tends to navigate toward, not the canon interracial ship with a person who loves Steela and allows her to exist outside of his life narrative. This ship the fandom pretty much hates and has been vocal about, despite the anti-blackness that comes with this hate. But rather, the ship for Steela is stripped of her character, purpose, and narrative, all to develop Ahsoka's character.
Thanks, Avery. Now, as for the narrative, when Dave Filoni got his hands on these characters, the story that ended up being told was, at first, okay. There was a lot of good. The conversation for who would be the leader of the militia was fantastic. Steela and Saw's relationship was realistic and relatable, and the organization of events was good for the most part. But Then, Steela's death is one of the lowest points of the series, not simply for the death itself, but for how it is treated. I've referenced before but never explained what the term women in refrigerators means. Defined by comic book author Gail Simone in response to then Green Lantern writer Ron Mars's killing off of a supporting character to motivate the title hero. Noticing that there was a trend in comics for a woman to die to motivate a man, Simone called out Mars, and the term has been widely used and referenced since, rightly so. However, one thing Simone and many others didn't acknowledge is the disparity between the way and frequency white women and black women are fridged. Throughout the Clone Wars, only 2 black women and 1 black girl have recurring speaking roles: Adi Gallia, Steela Gerrera, and Katooni. Adi Gallia is brutally murdered to motivate Obi-Wan. However, unlike the death of Madame Apartheid on Mandalore, her death is not mourned or mentioned again. Katooni's true fate is left unknown, mercifully, but her corpse is still used in a vision meant to motivate Yoda. Of course, her corpse is only set dressing, as the focus of the vision is on Ahsoka, whose potential death is the emotional and mental center of the scene. And, of course, there's Steela's death. In an interview, Dave Filoni said that he and Collins didn't feel like the characters could get away with the revolution without consequences, but that Steela's death was one of his favorites because, as he says, if you're gonna go out well. Well, was it a good death? What makes a good death? I'd argue that Darth Vader had the perfect death. His death was his choice, not a suicide, but a sacrifice. It was a logical action for him to take, but still one that wasn't guaranteed, or easy. He does a good thing, and that good is active. He returns to his best self, even though his evil is not forgotten or forgiven, nor is he redeemed. But he's mourned, and his sacrifice does mean something. And not for nothing, he also gets to talk to somebody before his death. He gets to say goodbye. I know it's popular nowadays for characters to die alone or suddenly, unable to say goodbye to their loved ones, and that may be more realistic in a war setting. But so much of fiction that's centered around war is unrealistic, and being able to say goodbye is such an important part of a peaceful, accepted death. Let's compare that to Steela. She doesn't choose to die. Her death is neither a sacrifice nor something that accomplishes anything. It was an accident, one that happened after the battle was over. She has no final words, no close moment with a loved one that knows she's going to die, and after her death, her mourning is minimal. Minor self-hatred from Saw, but Lux and Ahsoka are ready to move on, and Steela is never mentioned again in the series, and only mentioned briefly in one episode of Rebels, a bit of flavor text in A Fallen Order, and in the Rogue One adaptation. Not only was her death not her choice, not only was it used to supposedly impact Ahsoka, Ahsoka is not even affected by Steela's death. Steela, Adi, and the psychic vision version of Katooni all die suddenly without being able to say goodbye. Compare that to the deaths of white women on the show. Satine dies in Obi-Wan's arms, telling him that she loves him. Daughter dies in her father's arms, asking him to forgive his son. Even white-coated slave master Mirage Sintel gets a more tender death than Steela, able to say goodbye and have her death mean something. People often respond to this type of criticism by saying, what, can black women not die in fiction? No, that's not the problem. The two problems are that, one, there are so few black women already in fiction, written by white authors at least, that the death of the only ones is already disproportionately negative. And two, the way they die is not with the same dignity, the same love, or the same respect that is given to white women. If Steela had to die, it should have been her choice, a death while saving others or supporting her people. She should have had a chance to say goodbye, and her death should have meant something. Her death should have changed the people around her, not just her brother. And her death shouldn't have been tacked on at the end of an arc so that it has supposed consequences, but no true import, and no meaning beyond cynically killing the first lead black woman in Star Wars in over 10 years. Since this moment, Star Wars has had a mixed track record. In some cases, like with Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, 2 out of the 4 main characters are black women, and they're both complex and either likable or understandably bitter. And while they still have arcs, they drive the plot in a way that feels natural without feeling like they're put in for tokenism. On the other hand, we get characters like Vo in the current Rise of Kylo Ren comic, where it's implied that her unacceptance of Kylo Ren is what is to blame for his rise of fascism. Somewhere in the middle, we have somebody like Junda, a character that is really likable and interesting, but is sidelined and minimized so that we can pay more attention to the white hero. And sadly, I'm worried that that is the legacy that Steela will leave behind. Whether it be the fans or the story, Steela's unbelievable potential was squandered so that we could pay more attention to the white or the non-black characters. Still, for all of the faults that were taken by both the fandom and the narrative, when she was here, Steela was an amazing character, perhaps one of Star Wars' best. And even though I am disappointed with how her story ended, I'm not disappointed that we got her. Her greatness remains one of the shining spots of the Clone Wars, and hopefully someday we'll get justice for her. Before closing, I would like to say thank you again to Avery, and really suggest that if you like my content, or if you liked her part of this video, you should definitely check out her content, as well as some ways that you can support her, all linked in the description below. Thanks for listening.